There's one day left to go before the deadline when the US will break its debt ceiling. It will run out of borrowing capacity on Thursday, October the 17th. Now, with me to discuss this and the implications is Lionel Barber, editor of the Financial Times. Lionel, what's going on?
Just about 24 hours to go, Chris, before the big deadline. Never happened in history that the US might default. Now, right now, frantic negotiations are going on, mainly in the Senate, between the Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats, to craft a package which will give some face-saving elements to those irreconcilables in the House of Representatives, the Republicans, and allow them to back something which would allow an extension of the debt ceiling. Question is, can they get a deal in the next 24 hours?
Now, you've been extremely experienced in Washington politics. Have you ever seen anything quite so difficult in reconciling the two parties before?
Well, I wasn't around in 1957, 58, when the Senate was utterly polarized around civil rights. But interestingly, there slowly deals began to be done, and also positions were clearly defined. Here, the problem is that the relationship at the top, the key jobs, that's the head of the Senate Republicans, head of Senate Democrats, Harry Reid, and then John Boehner, who's the House Speaker, and the President, the relationships are poisoned. So it's very difficult to overcome personal mistrust, plus profound philosophical division in the same way as over civil rights, over the degree of spending and the size of government.
Now, a default is pretty unthinkable, so let's not think about that quite yet. What then is the most likely solution? How's that likely to play out?
Yeah, I think John Boehner, who's the crucial person in the House of Representatives, the Speaker, has said he doesn't want a default. So the most likely thing, and the things people are exploring, is an extension of the debt borrowing ceiling. So maybe you could come back to this question in 6 months. And then there's some other issues about, do you revisit the budget, the problem of sequestration, which is this across-the-board spending cuts. Harry Reid wants some relaxation there. And then, of course, there's the Republican trophy, which is so-called Obamacare, the health reforms which President Obama pushed through when he had both control over the House and the Senate. Deeply unpopular. The Republicans want to have another go at that.
So we're likely to get an extension for 6 months. Are we just going to be back in here, in the spring?
Well, that's the big fear in the White House, that you have a repeat of this brinkmanship, which takes up, of course, huge amounts of time and is very dangerous, unsettling to the markets. We haven't talked about that, of course. A default would undoubtedly be devastating in terms of confidence, interest rates going up, stock markets going down. So I think people are anxious not to have a repeat, but if it's the price of avoiding Armageddon tomorrow, they'll do it.
Now, walking along the edge of a cliff, which seems to be what American politicians are doing, always has the risk you might fall off and a deal might not be done. What happens to the markets? Well,
I think you have to distinguish between a hard default and a technical default. Technical being, guys, we were really trying to negotiate this and we just run out of time, but then you come back to a deal in 3 hours. I still think that would be very damaging in terms of market confidence. I talked about equity markets going down, bond interest rates, borrowing costs going up, and think about the rest of the world. I mean, we were supposed to be coming out of the recession into recovery, few little brighter lights in Europe. All this could be snuffed out if you had a hard default. So big question about whether Washington's going to look across the water and be aware of those larger consequences.
Do you think any central banks or commercial banks can actually prepare for the fact that maybe the central part of the financial system, US sovereign debt, might suddenly be seen to be tainted in some way?
Well, I had lunch with a CEO of a major bank yesterday and asked him that very question, and the answer is yes, we are preparing, but we don't even know the scale of devastation that you could see in the markets. You're already seeing some institutions like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange saying, actually, in terms of raising collateral against borrowing costs, this kind of thing, where people are in effect anticipating what could be the effect in the market in terms of higher borrowing costs.
Well, Lionel Barber, thank you very much. It's a very nerve-wracking few hours now. It's almost 24 hours, just over 24 hours before the deadline actually hits, and we'll wait and see. You can see on ft.com all the latest developments.